Good afternoon. I'm Matthew Spalding, Associate Vice President and Dean for Hillsdale College here in Washington, D.C. Welcome to the Alan P. Kirby Center for Constitutional Studies and Citizenship. Those that founded Hillsdale College believe that the diffusion of sound learning is essential to perpetuating the blessings of civil and religious liberty and intelligent piety in the land. We believe that sound liberal arts education includes studying the humanities, the natural sciences, and the social sciences, and as a result, we require our students to take numerous courses in those areas. Among them are these courses: great books in the Western tradition, great books in the British and American traditions, the Western heritage to 1600, the American heritage, and our core course, the United States Constitution. We hold with Jefferson that a good education in reading, writing, and arithmetic, 3 R's, along with a serious study of history, and in particular, a knowledge of the history of our own country, renders Americans, as he wrote, worthy to receive and able to guard the sacred deposit of the rights and liberties of their fellow citizens. Unfortunately, the discipline of history has been for some time in decline, both as an academic pursuit as well as its role in civic formation. This discussion, these concerns and debates have been going on and have been renewed of late with the controversy over the College Board's advanced placement examination in U.S. history. Our speaker today is more than qualified to discuss this matter in its proper context. A noted intellectual historian, he has written several books, including The Masterless, Self and Society in Modern America, The Student's Guide to U.S. History, and Figures in the Carpet, Finding the Human Person in the American Past. He serves on several editorial and advisory boards and is a member of the Board of Governors of the Historical Society. He's a senior scholar at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, a senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and from 2002 until 2012 served on the National Council of the Humanities. Having taught at Georgetown, Tulane, Johns Hopkins, and the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, he is currently the G.T. and Libby Blankenship Chair in History of Liberty at the University of Oklahoma. Please join me in welcoming Professor Wilfred Bill McClay.
Thank you, Matt. It's wonderful to be here. This is my first visit to this beautiful place. It's amazing what you can do without government funding. So whether that's something you've done you've done this in spite of that, or because of it, I leave to another lecture at another time. But it's very good to be here. I'm delighted to talk about this subject, even though it's a somewhat doleful subject. And actually, I have one small correction to your introduction. I was a member of the Board of Visitors and Governors of the Historical Society. Historical Society no longer exists, fortunately, and it was created to be, among other things, an organization that promoted the study of history in the sort of manner that I'm going to try to put forward today. And we no longer exist, so that tells you something about the nature of the problem. So it was a felicitous addition to your introduction. So I'm here to talk about history, historical writing, historical practice, as well as the teaching of history education. And both are, as Matt said in his introduction, in a bad way, I'm afraid. And I think their deficiencies arise out of similar sources for both historical practice and historical teaching. In fact, I think the causes are linked. And I also am grateful to Matt for placing my remarks today in the broader context that I want them to be seen in. I'm going to take a while before I actually get to talking about the AP controversy, because I want you to have a full sense of why it's so important. It's not just a small skirmish on the edges of the endlessly moving frontiers of pedagogical fights about this and that. I think it's something that's actually much more important, much more indicative of the problems of where we find ourselves. In both cases, I think, both historical practice and historical teaching, I think we have lost our way by forgetting that the study of the past makes the most sense when it's connected to a larger purpose, a public purpose, and is therefore woven into the warp and woof of our common life. The chief purpose of a high school education in American history is not the development of critical thinking and analytical skills, although those things are important. It is not about the mastery of facts, although a solid grasp of the factual basis of American history is surely essential. Nor is it about the acquisition of a more deep and genuine historical consciousness, although that would certainly be nice to have, particularly in the present circumstances when the historical memory and attention span seems to run at about 15 minutes, especially, but not exclusively, with the young. No, the chief purpose of a secondary school education in American history is as a rite of civic membership, an act of inculcation and formation, a way in which the young are introduced to the fullness of their political and cultural inheritance as Americans, enabling them to become literate and conversant in its many features, and to appropriate fully all that it has to offer them, both its privileges and its burdens. It lets them make its stories theirs, their own, and thereby lets them come into a possession of the common treasure of its cultural life. In that sense, the study of American history is different from any other academic subject, in particularly from the high school level. It's not merely a body of knowledge. It ushers the individual person out of a narrow circle of his or her immediate environment and into membership in a common world. It helps situate them in space and time. It is or should be central to their sense of their own identity. I sometimes think of this ushering out of themselves and into a larger world in terms of the greatest metaphor of education we have, and that is Plato's metaphor of the cave, of the cave dwellers who come into the light. This is especially true, all that I'm saying, in a democracy. The American founders, perhaps most notably Thomas Jefferson, well understood that no popular government could flourish for long without an educated citizenry, one that understood the special virtues of republican self-government and the civic and moral duty of citizens to uphold and guard it. The historian Donald Kagan, in a very fine article in the Wall Street Journal a while back, said, democracy requires a patriotic education. I like that phrase. Democracy requires a patriotic education. And it does so for two reasons. First, because its success, the success of democracy, depends on the active participation of citizens in their own government. And second, because without such an education, there would be no way to persuade free individuals of the need to sacrifice the pursuit of their self-interest for the sake of the greater good. Now we seem to think that we can dispense with such an education, and in fact are likely to disparage it reflexively, treating it as a form of propaganda or jingoism, a form of partiality that in itself constitutes a form of moral transgression. This is deeply ingrained in American students. I taught all over the country in states red and blue, institutions elite and non-elite, and invariably I find the same reflex among them, that this notion that a patriotic education is a kind of moral failure or moral something fraught with moral peril. Kagan says in this article I mentioned before, the encouragement of patriotism is no longer a part of our public educational system, and the cost of that omission has made itself felt in a way that would have alarmed and dismayed the founders of this country. certainly think he's right about that. Why has this happened? Well, there's many reasons, and I'm not going to talk about all of them today, but some part of the responsibility for these developments belongs with the field of history itself. A century ago, professional historians still imagined that their discipline could be a science, able to explain the doings of nations and peoples with the dispassionate precision of a natural science. That misplaced confidence is long gone. Like many of the disciplines making up the humanities, history has for some time now been experiencing a slow dissolution, as Matt said in his introduction, a decline that may be approaching a critical juncture. Students of academic life express this decline quantitatively, citing shrinking enrollments, disappearance of required history courses, the loss of tenurable faculty positions, as always, the most important thing of all. But it goes much deeper than that. One senses a loss of self-confidence, a fear that the study of the past may no longer be something valuable or important. The history itself lacks the capacity to be a coherent and truth-seeking enterprise, producing genuine knowledge that can help locate us in the broad expanse of space and time. Instead, it's likely to be seen as a relativistic funhouse in which all narratives are arbitrary and all interpretations are equally valid. Or perhaps history, and this is not incompatible with the relativistic funhouse, perhaps history is useless to us because it's deemed that the road we've traveled to date offers us only a parade of negative examples, of horribles, of oppression, error, and obsolescence, an endless tableau of Confederate flags, so to speak. Proof positive that the past has no heroes worthy of our admiration and no lessons applicable to our own unprecedented age. It's not a coincidence that one of the best-selling works of history used in many high schools is, ironically, a book entitled Lies My Teacher Told Me. I don't know how teachers who assign this book sort of square that with... This loss of faith in the central importance of history pervades all of American society. It actually undermines the critiques in a certain way. Gone are the days when widely shared understandings of the past provided a sense of civilizational unity and forward propulsion. Instead, we live, or so argues historian Daniel Rogers, in an age of fracture, in which all narratives are contested, all the disciplines take a varied and incompatible view of the human condition, rarely speak to one another, because what do they have to say? And have abandoned the search for a common ground in favor of focusing on the concerns and perspectives of ever more minute subdisciplines, ever smaller groups, ever more finely tuned and aggrieved categories of experience. This is not just a feature of academic life, I don't need to say, but seems to be an emerging feature of American life more broadly. The broad and embracing commonalities of old are no more, undermined and fragmented into 1,000 subcultural pieces. There is no big picture history out there to be had, and those who try to engage in it are likely, almost certain, to encounter the withering scorn of their peers, particularly if it's a non-apocalyptic big picture. That's the worst thing of all. This condition has profound implications for the academy and for our society. The loss of history not only as a body of knowledge, but as a distinctive way of thinking about the world, thinking about the big picture. This will have, and is already having, dire effects on the quality of our civic life. And it would be ironic if the great advances, and I admit these and celebrate them, the great advances in professional history writing seen in the past century or so, advances that have allowed the exploitation of fresh data, new techniques of analysis, opening to us a much more expansive understanding of hidden aspects of the past, the inner world of slavery, for example. If these advances were to come at the expense of a more general audience for history and the resultant valuable effects of that kind of history on our public life, it would be ironic, but it appears to be true. New York University historian Thomas Bender laments in a recent article gloomily entitled, "How Historians Lost Their Public." The growth of knowledge in ever more numerous subspecialties of history has resulted in the displacement of the old-fashioned survey course in colleges and universities. Remember this when we come to my talking about advanced placement, the displacement of the survey course in colleges and universities. The survey course, which a generation or so ago, and some of us had these kind of courses, with expansive scale, big picture, synthesizing panache, virtuoso pedagogues, lecturers that people remember for the rest of their lives. And its replacement by narrowly focused courses confined to the research specialty of the professor. That's what we have now. Bender recognizes the problem. He doesn't want to give up the advances of the profession in these areas of historical cultivation, but he concedes something has gone wrong. Historians have lost the ability to speak to and command the attention of a large audience, even a well-educated one, seeking more general meanings in the past. They have lost their public. He's right about that. And he goes on to say they've conceded the ground to journalists who know how to write more accessibly and know how to write about topics. For example, journalist Tom Brokaw's celebration of the greatest generation, topics that strike a chord with the public, but that professional historians are almost certain to disdain as triumphalist, ethnocentric, unacceptably celebratory. Professional historians complain that such material lacks nuance, rigor, and is prone to repackage the past in terms readers find pleasing to their preconceptions. They often are right about that, I add. But such works are at least being read by a public that is still hungry for history. The loss of a public for history may be due to the loss of a history for that public. Instead, professional historiography is produced mainly for the consumption of other professional historians, and more precisely by the small subset of those who share the research specialty of the author. The very proposition that professional historiography, it's a hard word to say, should concern itself in fundamental ways with civic needs is one most professional historians would find suspect and some downright unacceptable. A transgression against free scholarly inquiry, which is not always the first refuge of scoundrels, but it's certainly a refuge for some of them. Such resistance is understandable because conscientious historians need to be constantly wary of the threat to their scholarly integrity posed by political and other considerations. There can be no doubt that the professionalization of the field has brought a remarkable degree of protection for disciplinary rigor and intellectual freedom. But must abandonment of all civic responsibility come in tandem with the professionalization of the field? I think not. But it certainly presents a problem, not only for the public, for the study of the history itself, if it no longer can attract a reading public, and even more deeply, can no longer generate a plausible organizing principle out of its own achievements. So before I turn to the dramatic revision of the AP U.S. history examination as an example of this problem of the loss of the past, let me first offer you an even more vivid and egregious example of it. Our startling inability to conceive, build, and public monuments and memorials. These are the edifices, it's a classic way that history and public life intersect. They are, by their very nature, meant to rally the public consciousness, to affirm the body politic, past, present, and future, in the act of recollection and commemoration and recommitment to the future. There is a profundity approaching the sacramental in the atmosphere created by such places as they draw together generations of the living, the dead, and those yet unborn in a bond of mutuality and solidarity. The great structures and statuary that populate the National Mall here in Washington, the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, and so on, or the solemnity of Arlington National Cemetery, do this superbly well. There is a sense, too, that cemeteries honoring fallen soldiers of the Confederacy, including those at Arlington, somehow deserve our general respect, even if the cause for which they fell does not. But these structures were a product of an earlier time when the national consensus was stronger and healthier. Today, as is illustrated by the endless deadlock over the design and erection of a memorial to Dwight D. Eisenhower, not exactly a controversial figure, a drama that's become a fiasco, we seem to find the construction of monuments almost impossibly difficult. The long, arduous process of coming up with a memorial for the 9/11 attacks would be another example of this. And in a different but not unrelated way, the sudden passion to cleanse the American landscape of any and all allusions to the Confederacy or slaveholding, a paroxysm that's more reminiscent of Robespierre than Lincoln, or of Orwell rather than Thucydides, also suggests the emergence of a public that's losing meaningful contact with its own history in all its moral complexity. Again, why has this happened? In the case of the Eisenhower Memorial, the answer is easy. It happened because the work of designing the memorial was turned over to a fashionable celebrity architect who proved incapable of subordinating his monumental ego to the task of memorializing a mere American hero. But more generally, it's happened because the whole proposition of revering and memorializing past events and persons has been called into question by our prevailing intellectual ethos, which cares little for the authority of the past and frowns on anything that smacks of hero worship or filiopietism. The past is always required to plead its case before the bar of the present, where it generally loses because the rules have changed and are constantly changing. That ethos is epitomized in the burgeoning academic study of memory, a term that we sort of know what it means, but in this context, it refers to something vaguely suspect. It refers to a culture's widely held popular understandings of the past, particularly those that involve the meaning of the nation state. Memory, in this particular sense, is the sense of history we all share, which is why monuments and other instruments of national commemoration are especially important as serving as expressions and embodiments of it. But the systematic problematizing, to use a very academic word, problematizing of memory, the insistence on subjecting it to endless rounds of suspicion, aiming precisely at the destabilizing of public meanings, is likely to produce impassable obstacles to effective public commemoration of the past. Now, historians have always been involved in the correcting of popular misrenderings of the past. That's an important aspect of their job. But memory studies tends to carry the debunking ethos much further, consistently approaching collective memory as nothing more than the willful construction of would-be reality rather than the accurate reflection of it. Scholars in the field examine memory with a jaundiced and highly political eye, viewing nearly all claims for tradition or for a worthy past as flimsy artifice designed to serve the interests of dominant classes and individuals, and otherwise tending to reflect the class, gender, and power relations in which those individuals are embedded. Memory, argues the historian John Gillis, has no existence beyond our politics, our social relations, and our histories. We have no alternative, he goes on to say, but to construct new memories, as well as new identities, better suited to the complexities of a post-national era. The audacity of this agenda could not be clearer. It's nothing less than a drive to expel the nation state, the American nation state in particular, and completely reconstitute public consciousness around a radically different idea of what history ought to be for, substituting a whole new set of loyalties and narratives and heroes and notable events, which we're in the process of constructing, perhaps directed to some post-national entity or a mere abstraction for the ones inhering in civic life as it now exists. It would mean a complete rupture with the past and with all admired things that formerly associated themselves with the idea of the nation, including the sacrifices of former generations, which almost all of the monumental and funerary art that I've described is engaged in doing. Ernest Renan, who wrote a very interesting essay called What is a Nation, a little over 100 years ago, said that a nation itself is a large-scale solidarity constituted by the feeling of the sacrifices that one has made in the past and of those that one is prepared to make in the future as part of a desire to continue a common life. I think that nicely, let me read that again. Large-scale solidarity constituted by the feeling of the sacrifices that one has made in the past and of those one's prepared to make in the future as part of a desire to continue a common life. That solidarity, that quest to continue a common life, all of these things would be placed in jeopardy by the agenda that Gillis proposes, and so many of the memory studies people are really about. So, at this point, the controversy over the AP U.S. History Framework comes into play. Not that the College Board, the private New York-based organization that administers the exam, openly espouses such a radical agenda. Instead, the College Board argues that its 2014 revision of the AP exam has sought to make the exam more perfectly reflect the contents of a typical collegiate introductory survey course in American history. You remember what Thomas Bender said about the introductory survey course in American history. On the surface, of course, this makes sense, since the avowed purpose of AP from the beginning is to provide a shortcut to college credit for advanced and talented and unusually well-prepared graduating seniors, high school seniors, and giving them college credit for things that allow them to place into more advanced courses. But it's also a huge problem, as Bender himself observed. The introductory survey course, which was once the glorious entryway to a college history department, is now a shambles. It's the neglected and unwanted stepchild of every history department. And the course whose teaching is relegated wherever possible. They don't do this at Hillsdale College, I'm sure, but wherever possible in other institutions with which I've been associated, relegated to graduate students and adjunct professors, as if they have a better idea of the big picture than the tenured full professors who are teaching their seminars of 3 students. The survey course could stand as Exhibit A in the age of fracture, and it supplies an especially poor model for what we should be teaching our high school students. In general, let me make an interjection here that I think a great many, I'm not really prepared to talk about this in detail, but I think a great many of the mistakes that we've made in pedagogy in the last 40 years or so stem from a tendency to think that it's always better to go from the top down. That is to say that the insights that people who are operating at the cutting edge or the most advanced areas of a discipline would be ever so much better if they could be trickled down or jammed down into earlier forms of instruction. So I think reading has been a victim of this. I think mathematics instruction in elementary and high school has been a victim of this. And I think the AP exam threatens in many ways to bring it into history as well, this sort of what I call the top-down fallacy. A little history of the advanced placement exam, which was not, you may have noticed in the book of Genesis, it isn't mentioned in the first 6 days of creation. It hasn't been around all that long. It was introduced in the years after the Second World War, and the association of the advanced placement exam with this one organization, the College Board, a private organization that does not have a charter from Congress to be the exclusive proprietor of this particular benefit, it was from the beginning the administrator of it. A great many colleges and universities in the United States and more than 20 other countries grant credits or advanced placement based on students' AP test scores in a variety of disciplines. I'm sure about half of the audience probably has taken AP exams, perhaps recently enough that you're still recovering from the experience. There we go. The AP history, U.S. history test, give you a sense of the proportions we're talking about here, is taken by 500,000 people every year. Now that doesn't mean that they all pass it, and that those who pass have grades that are high enough to get college credit, or that the college they want to go to will accept their grades as credit. In fact, only 1 out of 8 in that massive number actually ever get any college credit for their AP tests. But I digress. The important thing is that for many American students, the AP test has taken the place of the required U.S. history survey course in colleges and universities, making its structure and makeup a matter of even greater importance from the standpoint of civic education, since many of these students will never take another American history course in their academic life. The pervasive use of the test has had many sources, but surely its widespread adoption is testimony to the general trust that has so far been reposed in the test and in the College Board, which in the past has always struck a sensible balance between and among different approaches to the American past and given a great deal of freedom to individual teachers as to what they wanted to emphasize. As an indication of this, in the past, the College Board had a 5-page guideline or framework that was provided to guide teachers in their administration of the course. Not very onerous. Well, the new framework for the 2014 version of the test has 130 some odd pages outlining the framework. And this 134 pages in the new iteration of the test represents a radical change, repudiation of that earlier, more laissez-faire approach. It's a lurch in the direction of more centralized control and also the expression of a distinct agenda, one that not only downplays comprehensive content knowledge, which is always the redeeming, from my point of view, not from the point of view of students necessarily, but the redeeming grace of the AP test is that you had to learn a lot of factual things that could be applied in various ways. They're now downplaying content knowledge, but they're also seeking to de-emphasize American citizenship and American world leadership in favor of a global and transnational perspective on American history. The new framework is organized around such opaque and abstract concepts as identity and peopling and human geography, whatever that is, while giving only the most cursory attention, and this is, I think, the real outrage, only the most cursory attention to traditional subjects, such as the sources, meaning, and development of America's fundamental political institutions, notably the Constitution, and the narrative accounting of political events such as elections, wars, diplomacy, and the like. It is a radical change in that regard, even if the specifics of the changes are not spelled out. Various critics, some of whom are in the audience here, have noted the political and ideological biases inherent in the 2014 framework, and certain structural innovations will inevitably result in imbalance in the test and bias in the course. But frankly, the language of the framework is sufficiently murky that one can argue that these criticisms are overstated, since they're arguing with jelly-like language out of which definite meanings are very hard to tease. We won't really know the results of the test until the test is already in place, and therefore almost impossible to dislodge. But this criticism, I think, cannot be leveled at the critics of the test, of the change, with regard to the treatment of American national identity. The 2010 framework, this is only 4 years later that we're revising it. The 2010 framework treated national identity, including views of the American national character and ideas about American exceptionalism, as a central theme. I actually just quoted views of the American national character and ideas about American exceptionalism comes from the language of the 2010 framework. But the 2014 framework makes a dramatic shift away from that emphasis, choosing instead to grant far more extensive attention to, and here I quote from the 2014 document, how various identities, cultures, and values have been preserved or changed in different contexts of U.S. history, with a special attention given to the formation of gender, class, racial, and ethnic identities. Well, there's a lot of jelly in that sentence, too, but the thrust of it is clear when you get to the last part of it. Special attention to the formation of gender, class, racial, and ethnic identities. This is pretty plain. The new framework makes a shift from national identity to subcultural identities, from identity to identities. In fact, the new framework is so populated with examples of American history as the conflict between social groups, and so inattentive to how students will gain any coherent idea of what binds the nation together, that it's hard, again, for me to see it as a workable document, as a workable way to actually organize and teach a course. So students without a coherent idea of what sources of unity in American life might be are being placed at a real disadvantage, and so are we when that happens to them. The big picture is not of the meaning of American history, but of American history as just one element in a transatlantic capitalist and often exploitative economy. That's as big as the picture gets. If this is permitted to take hold, the new version of the test will in time effectively marginalize traditional ways of teaching about the American past and force American high schools, force the best teachers, because the best teachers are often the ones who teach the AP course, to teach U.S. history from a perspective that self-consciously seeks to decenter American history and the history of the West and the history of the globe. Is this the right way to prepare young people for American citizenship? How can we call forth those acts of sacrifice that Renan referred to, that our democracy needs, not only on the battlefield, but in our daily lives, the acts of dedication to the common good that are the heart of civilized life? How can we do this without training up citizens who know about and appreciate that democracy, care about the common good, and feel themselves to be part of the nation's community of memory? How can we expect our citizens to grapple intelligently with the enduring debates in our national past, the role of the U.S. Constitution, the reasons behind the separation of powers? I know these are ideas you have never heard before. The limits of federal authority, the sources of our rights and duties. How can we expect people to to deliberate about these things intelligently if they know nothing about the long trail of debates, in very particular debates in the past, that have made up the texture of our history and instead are taught to translate that into abstract, one-size-fits-all language of the global and transnational wisdom du jour. The word global here appears often in the framework, as you can imagine. We often speak of these days of the concept of global citizenship. Schools of higher education actually advertise themselves as offering a global education, often with very little to substantiate it, but still, that it is a term to conjure with in our advertising about higher education. So we often speak in these terms. We see it as a form of advanced consciousness to which our students should be made to aspire. But global citizenship is at best a fanciful term, abstract and remote, unspecific in its requirements. Actual citizenship is different, since it always entails membership in the life of a particular place, a particular town, a particular state, a particular country. It means having a home address, a landline, so to speak. Education does young people no favors when it fails to equip them for that kind of membership, nor does it do any of the rest of us any favors. We won't be able to uphold our democracy unless we know our great stories, our national narratives, and the admirable deeds of our great men and women, and not only their flaws. The new AP history course fails on that count because it does not see, it is blind to the essentially civic role of education as a central one, particularly in these matters relating to history in the past. We need an approach to the past that conduces most fully to a healthy foundation for our common civic existence, one that resists the culture of fracture rather than acceding to it. This is not a call for an uncritical, triumphalist account of the past. Such an account would not be an advance because it would fail to give us the tools of intelligent self-criticism. But neither does an approach that in the name of post-national anti-triumphalism reduces American history to little more than the aggregate sum of a multitude of past injustices and oppressions, without bringing those offenses into their proper context and showing them as elements of a great story, of a longer American effort to live up to lofty and demanding ideals. Both of these caricatures fail. They fail to do what we have a right to expect our history to do. Nor, unfortunately, can the professional historian supply a basis for it, since their work proceeds from a very different set of premises, and they can't be trusted to resist the temptation to own their subject. I present as Exhibit A for that, the Enola Gay exhibit at Smithsonian a number of years ago. Instead, historians will find their public again when the public can find them, when the public can find its historians, who can keep in mind that the writing of history is to be for that public. For that public. Not for in the sense of fulfilling its expectations, flattering its prejudices, and disguising its fault, like court historians. Not for in the sense of underwriting a particular political agenda, which is what Thomas Bender wants, but for in the sense of being addressed to them as one people with a common past and a common future, affirmative of what's noblest and best in them, and directed towards their aspirations, toward the fulfillment of those aspirations. History has been a victim of the age of fracture, but it can also be an antidote to it, if we're willing to let it be an antidote. And strangely enough, I think the way we need to proceed in thinking about history is indicated to us by this controversy over high school teaching of history. So That's why I think this is so important, and I'm happy to have talked to you about it today. Thank you. Should you want? Oh, you may.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation, and I wanted to focus on your attention to the diminishing appreciation for the big picture history. Our founding fathers, some of our founding fathers, thought that Plutarch's Lives was an excellent textbook for people in a democracy to learn about character. And I'm wondering, with history having sort of looked down on biographies so much, if a possible backdoor to beginning to get new attention on history might be through biographies and character studies and biographies, and the presentation of public policy issues that people grappled with in the course of their lives as citizens.
Absolutely. I'm actually talking to this, shouldn't I? Absolutely. Did everyone hear him arguing that biography we ought to employ biography more than we do as a way of teaching the past, and Plutarch's, the importance of Plutarch to the founders and to that generation. Absolutely, and this is one of the things that is almost precluded in the new AP framework. There's one thing I should tell you in candor is that they have reacted, the College Board has reacted in several stages of reaction to the criticisms, because there have been several waves of criticism, and each wave of criticism they sort of say, oh, well, we're gonna revise it, we're gonna take care of that, and we're now awaiting a revision that is supposedly taking into account the latest wave of criticisms. But one of the responses made by the president of the College Board is that the need to include biography. But it is an add-on. It's not central. It's not. It wasn't there in the original conception of the thing. Biography is a stepchild in academic writing. It's something that people like David McCullough do it so much better, and so many more books, and therefore incur the wrath and contempt of academic historians who can't seem to sell books the way David McCullough and others do. But this goes to one of the reasons that the founders valued Plutarch was that this was the lives of exemplary Greeks and Romans, and there was a notion that when you were teaching people about the past, it was the building of character, use the term you used, is part and parcel of what you're about. This is not mere erudition. It is the acquisition of the kind of mind, of a sort of toolkit for living well in a Republican society, in a society that demands one's virtuous commitment to public life, and that's missing. I think that's missing entirely from our education. The notion that reading about an admirable figure can call forth admirable aspects in the individual who reads about them. That sort of sense that we're involved in a project of moral formation in education. I think this is very much missing from the way that history is taught. And I think even historians who don't go the lies my teacher told me kind of route, and that's a very popular book. There's no gainsaying that fact. But and for a lot of young people, it's interesting because they like the sort of frisson of debunking. Yeah, George Washington was really a bum. Thomas Jefferson, whoa. And we know all these things. We have the dirt on all these great individuals. Well, some of the dirt is true. Some of it's dubious. But in the end, we have to find people the way we advance morally is by the example of others, of those who provide admirable examples. Plutarch understood that. Why can't we? Yes.
Thank you very much. I've taught AP US history, and I still teach Plutarch's Lives.
All right. Yeah. Well, it's part of U.S. history, and because of exactly what this gentleman said.
That's right. Thank you very much. I just wanted to run two sort of tactical suggestions and sort of trial balloons and see what you say to them about how to oppose this new framework further and more effectively. One, in terms of biography, it's good to have good biographies of people, but also to have the broken man, sort of people you don't want to follow. And I think about that as a real easy way to communicate truths. And I think of David Coleman, who's sort of the great Ahab hunting the red, white, and blue whale of American curriculum right now, who's kind of a dramatically tragic, strange character. And I wonder if maybe highlighting this man's kind of strange quest might be something effective. That's one thing to consider.
Well, you know more about him than I do. The things I've read about him make me think I'd really enjoy his company, and that he would be somebody who I could talk about Plutarch with. I think he may have actually read Plutarch. He certainly he has a literary background and so on. But they seem completely these accounts of him seem completely contradictory to what he's wrought. At least, and I don't know much about the Common Core part of his career, but the AP exam. Now, I'm told by some people that all of that was put in place before he went to the College Board, so he may simply have had nothing to do with it. But even though I think the biographical is important in this instance, I think we have to win on issues and not on personalities. I'm interested in what you say.
Yeah, I think sometimes his biography has been sort of crafted the way a hopeful Supreme Court justice nominee gets his biography crafted. But the other one, which is more substantive, is I wonder, because as you made such a good case that patriotism drives people crazy, just as an idea, if maybe we go further upstream to gratitude, right? Sort of Cicero's on duties. Mm-hmm. Why would you feel duty to your city, to your nation, to Rome, or to the United States? It's because you are grateful for all of these things that are seen and unseen, physical and metaphysical, that are all around you, that if that might be a good way to get more people on our side and expose them for the sort of ennui merchants that they are, sort of constantly pushing ingratitude, without having, touching the third rail of patriotism for people who might not agree with us about.
I agree with you, but I also struggle with that. How do you persuade people that they should be grateful? I can remember in my own trajectory that being distinctly resistant to these pleas, and in fact seeing them as a form of I didn't all the fashionable lefty vocabulary that I would have been able to deploy later, but attempts to sort of manipulate, co-opt me, and sort of guilt trip me, and so on. You're trying to make me steer me away from the pursuit of my God-given or whatever given right to autonomy, my Supreme Court given right to personal autonomy. And really, no joke. I mean, the idol of personal autonomy militates against the notion of gratitude. How can you be grateful if the only meaningful values are the ones that you create for yourself? Well, yeah. Well, you got the same problem. How do you cultivate love? Love or I'll blow your brains out. I mean, how do you I know Christians deal with the command to love from Jesus, but I don't know that there's any way that a secondary education can address that problem in a strictly secular way. But I think you're right. I think that's it. The sense that we are not in any way indebted to our past, to things that others, including our parents and grandparents and others who have made our life possible. If anything, we have a grievance. Why did I go to a crummy public high school instead of Andover? Why did why couldn't I have a boat when I was a kid? Why even the most comfortably middle-class person has grievances. And grievances have a kind of moral power and now in our culture that gratitude doesn't have. Gratitude is so wimpy and submissive. With grievance, that's what really fires people's imagination. How that comports with love, I'm not really sure. But love is maybe conceding the grievances of others as valid without question. Yes?
Well, to sort of bring things full circle, I think that it is through biography of virtuous people, which Aristotle acknowledged there are some. Everyone's not the same. And certainly you read eyewitness accounts of people we consider great people, and their virtue was splendid. It was acknowledged by everyone. And so I think that's how we relearn the virtues of piety and gratitude, is through reading good biographies about virtuous people.
Let me take this question. That's very good. I can't add to that. So this gentleman gets a break.
Thank you for your talk, Dr. McClay. I appreciate it very much. My name is Jason Ross. I'm Director of Programs with the Ashbrook Center at Ashland University. We're one of the nation's largest organizations that provides training for history and government teachers. And I want to say that the problem is perhaps even deeper than you presented it. The fact of the matter is that when history teachers enter the classroom, they don't know any history. They don't know any history. But that's also an opportunity, because many of them, once they sort of make it through their first 3-4 years and decide that they want to remain in this profession, they want to know history. Mm-hmm. So and they don't know enough history to object to the kind of framework or approach that the College Board puts in front of them. That's a problem. One of the other issues that I have seen in the last few years is that a major source of funding for the training of history and government teachers has gone away. That funding was provided by the federal government. The federal government never stops funding anything, but they have stopped funding training for history and government teachers. So I wonder, and just for some context, my organization, Ashbrook, we have trained over 8,000 teachers how to read primary source documents, put down the textbook, and teach their students with the words of Madison and Jefferson and Lincoln and Washington. And they love the freedom that they have from the textbook once they learn this stuff. So what I would wonder is, in your experience in this issue, have you come across any individuals who understand the opportunity that the federal government's departure has given to private citizens to exercise leadership on this issue? Or are there historical examples of other issues in which the federal government has perhaps departed from a space that has left space for private citizens to exercise leadership?
Well, that's an interesting question to ask, particularly in this setting, since this is an institution that has thrived, albeit against terrific odds, in precisely a rejection of federal benefits and controls. I don't really know of anybody other than you who is making this point, but there's a lot of what Jason says. It's absolutely, I couldn't agree more, and all of it really. And it is a great opportunity in the sense the maleducation of this generation of high school teachers. I run a summer institute at the University of Oklahoma for teachers, in which actually Gordon Lloyd, your colleague, participated this summer, and they love, it's exactly as Jason describes. They love to do this. We pay them a measly little honorarium, and out of which they buy their meals. We don't, this is not a cushy thing, but they're very avid to come. We've turned many people away, and we're in our second year of doing it now. And it comes down to a point that I made at the beginning that, in passing, this sort of top-down issue. We don't think enough about high school. We worry about the colleges and universities and the idiocies that go on in them. There's no immediate cure for any of that. Probably financial distress is going to do more good in higher education than any reforms that we can undertake. But high schools are a different matter. We could make a difference there. There's a lot of the residuum of patriotic sentiment among faculty, among students, among administrators, among parents. And I think even though the behemoth of the public education lobby is enormous, the disintegration of public education is also an opportunity. And the inability of it to deliver on its promises at enormous costs. So I'd like to see us concentrate more on secondary education, particularly in this area. But I'm one of these freaks who thinks that too many people go to college. Harry Truman didn't go to college, and he's been superior to almost everyone who has succeeded him. So, of course, it's a different world. But there's no reason why high school education shouldn't prepare you for a great many forms of employment, a great many of life's tests. College education certainly doesn't prepare you for it. So I end with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill, for that great lecture. I think it was Madison, if I recall correctly, who said that if we want to encourage the love of liberty and the law, it must first be an object of our knowledge. So the teaching of history is incredibly important. I commend your work you're now doing in Oklahoma, previously work you've done with Madison Center at Princeton. Ashbrook Center was mentioned. Our friends here from the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, others who are here. This work, I think, is crucially important. Hillsdale is taking a role in that as well. I think this is a time when these questions are becoming more and more important in the civic life of our country. Things are changing in the nature of our country and our federal government, such that these questions are going to be more and more imperative. So this work must continue, and it will continue with help from people like you. Thank you very much. Thank you all for attending.